1 million pesos? The man in the wheelchair laughed, clapping his hands like he was starting a show. All yours if you make me walk again. The garden of San Miguel Rehabilitation Institute rang with cruel laughter. 4 wealthy men in tailored suits surrounded Mauricio Vargas, the richest man in the state, his luxury wheelchair gleaming like a trophy. In front of them stood a barefoot little girl, dirt on her knees, clothes torn by poverty, her small body trembling, but her eyes refusing to drop. Her name was Aaliyah Morales. Behind her, her mother, Carmen Morales, gripped a mop handle so hard it shook against the stone floor. She'd made one unforgivable mistake bringing her child to work because she couldn't afford childcare. Now her poverty was entertainment. "Do you even understand what 1 million means?" Mauricio asked, leaning down with a smile that felt colder than the marble beneath Aaliyah's feet. Aaliyah swallowed, glanced at her mother's tear-streaked face, then nodded. "It's more money than we'll ever see in our lives." The men roared again, one already raising his phone to record. They wanted a clip, a joke, a poor child begging for a miracle. But Aaliyah didn't beg. She looked straight at Mauricio's wheelchair, at the carbon fiber, the sensors, the arrogance built into every polished detail. And then she asked softly, almost innocently, "If you really believe it's impossible, why are you offering the money at all?" The laughter died mid-breath. Because in one sentence, a barefoot girl named Aaliyah exposed the truth. This wasn't an offer. It was humiliation dressed up as generosity. And Mauricio Vargas, who had spent years using money to remind people of their place, suddenly realized the child in front of him wasn't here to play her role. She was here to shatter the script. Carmen wanted to disappear. She pressed her back against the cold stone wall, wishing it would open up and swallow her whole. For 3 years, she had scrubbed the bathrooms of this institute before dawn, and after dark, learning how to make herself invisible. Invisible people didn't get mocked. Invisible people didn't get hurt. And yet here she was, seen exposed, stripped of dignity in front of men who treated cruelty like sport. "Please," Carmen whispered, her voice breaking as she stepped forward instinctively. "We're leaving. My daughter won't touch anything. I promise." Mauricio didn't even look at her at first. When he finally did, his eyes passed over her the way people glance at trash on the sidewalk, annoyed it existed at all. "I didn't give you permission to speak," he said calmly, which somehow made it worse. "For 3 years you've cleaned my toilets without me knowing your name. Don't start interrupting my meetings now." The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Carmen's shoulders caved inward. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Crying had never saved her before. She had been a teacher once, biology chalk on her hands, students who called her Miss Morales with respect. Then her mother died. Then life collapsed. And now she cleaned floors for men who laughed at her pain. Aaliyah saw it all. She saw the way her mother shrank, the way humiliation sat heavy on her chest, like a weight no child should ever have to witness. She remembered nights sharing a thin mattress, listening to her mother apologize for a life she never chose. She remembered hunger. She remembered promises whispered in the dark. "I'll protect you. I'll survive." Something inside Aaliyah shifted. The shame didn't disappear, but it hardened into something else, something colder, clearer. She lifted her chin. Her mother had taught her many things without meaning to: how to endure, how to stay quiet when the world was cruel. But standing there barefoot on polished marble, Aaliyah made a silent decision. She would not let this moment teach her to be small. If they were determined to remind her where she came from, then she would show them she was not weak because of it. She was forged by it. Aaliyah didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't step back. Instead, she looked at Mauricio the way adults rarely expect children to look at them, calm, observant, unafraid. "You're not really offering the money," she said softly. The words slipped into the air like a blade wrapped in velvet. Mauricio frowned. "What did you say?" "If you truly believed you could walk again." Aaliyah continued, her hands clenched at her sides. "Then offering 1 million pesos would be a risk. But you don't believe it. That's why it's easy to laugh." The garden went quiet. No laughter. No phones moving. Even the fountain behind them seemed too loud. "So this isn't a gift," she added. "It's a joke. A safe one. Because you're sure you'll never have to pay." One of the businessmen forced a laugh, sharp and uncomfortable. "The kid thinks she's clever." But Mauricio didn't laugh this time. His smile twitched, then steadied like a crack quickly plastered over. "And what makes you think you know anything about this?" he asked. Aaliyah hesitated just for a second, then spoke again. "My grandmother used to say that rich people buy impossible things," she said. "Not because they need them, but because it proves they can afford to fail." A murmur rippled through the group. "My grandmother healed people." Aaliyah went on, her voice still quiet but steadier now. "People doctors gave up on. She said the body listens before it moves, and that pain doesn't always live where doctors look." "Enough," Mauricio snapped, though there was something thinner in his tone now. "Fairy tales from a poor child don't scare me." Aaliyah met his eyes. "I'm not trying to scare you," she said. "I'm trying to understand you." She gestured gently toward the wheelchair. "You don't want to walk." "Not really. Because if you did, you wouldn't need to make fun of people who can." That landed harder than any insult. For the first time, Mauricio felt something shift, not in his legs, but in his chest. A pressure he hadn't named in years. Anger, shame, and beneath it all, fear. Because the barefoot girl standing before him wasn't mocking him. She was seeing him, and that terrified him more than the possibility that she might be right. Mauricio leaned back in his wheelchair, jaw tight, eyes narrowed, not with anger this time, but with something far more dangerous. "Doubt. You talk as if you know me," he said slowly. "As if you know what I want." Aaliyah didn't flinch. "I know what you're hiding." A ripple of discomfort passed through the men around him. This was no longer entertaining. This was personal. "You don't want to be healed." Aaliyah continued, her voice steady but heavy with something ancient. "Because being broken lets you hurt people without guilt. It gives you permission." Mauricio's fingers curled around the armrest. "That's enough," he snapped. "You're a child. You don't get to psychoanalyze me." Aaliyah looked at the wheelchair again, not with pity, not with fear, but with clarity. "My grandmother taught me something," she said. "She said you can't heal a body when the heart is still at war. And you're still fighting something inside yourself." Silence pressed down hard. "For 5 years," Aaliyah went on, "you've been surrounded by doctors, machines, money, and yet you chose today, this moment, to laugh at my mother. That tells me something." "What does it tell you?" Mauricio asked, his voice quieter now, stripped of its sharp edge. "That you don't feel powerful anymore," she said gently. "And power used to be how you felt alive." The words hit him like a blow to the ribs. One of the businessmen shifted awkwardly. Another cleared his throat. No one laughed now. No one filmed. Aaliyah took a small step closer. "I can't help someone who doesn't want to let go of their cruelty," she said. "Healing means changing, and change is terrifying." Mauricio stared at her for a long time. At the dirt on her knees. At the calm in her eyes. At the courage it took to stand there with nothing, no money, no protection except truth. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "What if I do want to try?" he asked quietly. "What if I don't know how anymore?" Aaliyah's expression softened, not in victory, but in recognition. Then she said, "You stop laughing at pain that isn't yours." For the first time in years, Mauricio Vargas felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest. Not hope, but the beginning of surrender. No one expected the room to change so suddenly. Mauricio nodded once, slowly, as if agreeing to something he had avoided for years. "Do it," he said. "Try." The laughter never came back. Doctors were summoned reluctantly. Monitors rolled in. Blood pressure cuffs, heart sensors, cameras. Not because they believed, but because they were afraid of being wrong. The businessmen stepped aside suddenly, quiet, suddenly unsure of their place in the story. Aaliyah took off her thin jacket and placed it carefully on a chair. "Sit still," she said, not as a command, but as a promise. "And listen to your body." Mauricio scoffed under his breath, but he didn't argue. For the first time in years, he obeyed without buying control. Aaliyah placed her small hands on his knees. They were cold, Tell me if you feel anything, she whispered. Nothing happened at first. Seconds stretched. Someone coughed. One of the monitors beeped steadily, indifferent. Then Mauricio inhaled sharply. Warm, he muttered. Aaliyah nodded, already moving her fingers, tracing slow, deliberate paths along his legs, up toward his spine. Her touch wasn't forceful. It wasn't dramatic. It was precise, like she was following a map only she could see. The warmth spread. Mauricio's breathing changed. It's spreading, he said, confusion cracking his voice, like pins and needles. A doctor stepped closer. That's impossible, he whispered, eyes glued to the screen. Aaliyah closed her eyes. My grandmother said the body remembers, she murmured, even when the mind gives up. Mauricio's hands gripped the armrests. I feel something, he said again, louder now. I haven't felt anything in 5 years. The room froze. Aaliyah pressed gently at a point near his lower spine. Mauricio gasped, not in pain, but shock. My toes, he said, tears suddenly filling his eyes. I can feel my toes. One of the businessmen staggered back as if struck. The doctor checked the monitors again. Then again. Neural response, he whispered. This shouldn't be happening. Mauricio laughed once, a broken, disbelieving sound, and then he started to cry. Not the silent, controlled tears of a powerful man, but the messy, helpless sobs of someone who had forgotten what hope felt like. Aaliyah's hands trembled now, exhaustion creeping in. That's enough for today, she said softly, stepping back. Mauricio looked at her, like she had handed him back a piece of his soul. You didn't just touch my legs, he said hoarsely. You woke something up. Aaliyah met his gaze, pale but steady. No, she said. You did. I just showed you where to listen. And for the first time since the accident, Mauricio Vargas wasn't thinking about money power or humiliation. He was thinking about tomorrow. By morning, the Institute no longer felt like a place of recovery. It felt like a rumor that had grown legs. Whispers moved faster than nurses. A security guard leaned in too close and asked questions he pretended weren't questions. A therapist stopped Aaliyah in the hallway just to stare at her hands as if expecting them to glow. By noon, people were standing near the elevators, who clearly weren't staff men and women with haunted eyes, canes, braces, wheelchairs. Hope clutched so tightly it looked like pain. Mauricio noticed it first. They're waiting for you, he said quietly, watching from his room, as a woman pressed her forehead against the glass doors downstairs, praying. All of them. Aaliyah's chest tightened. She hadn't meant for this. She hadn't planned for eyes to follow her, for whispers to trail behind her name like a shadow. She was just a girl who had touched a man's legs because cruelty had dared her to be small, and she refused. Now the world was knocking. By afternoon, the hallway outside Mauricio's suite was packed. A man with trembling hands begged for 5 minutes. A mother dropped to her knees, sobbing, saying her son hadn't walked in 7 years. Another shouted through tears, "Please just look at her. Just let her touch her once." Aaliyah stood frozen behind her mother. Carmen wrapped her arms around her, fierce and shaking. She's a child, she said over and over to anyone who would listen. She's tired. She's not a miracle machine. But desperation doesn't hear boundaries. Mauricio rolled forward, gripping the doorframe as if steadying himself, not physically, but morally. For years he had been the man behind the glass, insulated from other people's suffering by money and indifference. Now he saw what he had helped create. They're not monsters, he said softly. They're hurting. I know, Aaliyah whispered. Her voice cracked for the first time since it all began. And that's why it scares me, because she could feel it, the pull. The weight of hope settling on her shoulders, heavy and relentless. Her hands still tingled from the morning session. Her body felt hollowed out like a candle burned too long. A doctor approached, hesitant. What you did. It shouldn't be possible, he admitted. But something is happening. And people will come, more than this. Aaliyah looked down the hallway again. Faces blurred together, rich and poor, young and old, no hierarchy anymore, just need. I can't help everyone, she said quietly. And if I try, I'll disappear. Carmen knelt in front of her daughter, pressing their foreheads together. You don't owe the world your body, she whispered. You don't owe anyone pain. Mauricio watched them, throat tight. For the first time, he understood the true cost of miracles. Not money, but the human being asked to carry them. The breakthrough didn't begin in Mauricio's legs. It began in his voice. "Stop!" he said suddenly, as Aaliyah's hands hovered near his spine during the next session. His breathing had grown shallow, uneven. "There's something you need to know." The room stilled. Doctors paused. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. "It wasn't just an accident," Mauricio whispered, staring at the floor like it might swallow him whole. "The helicopter. I was flying it. I wanted to save money. I didn't hire the pilot that day." Aaliyah's hands lowered slowly, not touching him now, listening. The engine failed. He continued, tears slipping free. "When we started falling, my last thought wasn't fear. It was guilt. I knew it was my fault. The pilot died because of me." Carmen felt her chest tighten. The businessmen looked away, suddenly stripped of words. The doctors exchanged glances, uncomfortable but alert. Aaliyah stepped closer. "You paid his family," she said softly, not accusing. "Yes." Mauricio nodded desperately. "Everything. Education, a house, a pension. But money doesn't erase knowing you killed someone." His body trembled. 5 years of rage, cruelty, and arrogance cracked open like a dam. "My grandmother used to say something," Aaliyah said gently, "that sometimes the body stops moving because the heart doesn't believe it deserves to." Mauricio shook his head. "That's not how paralysis works." "No," she agreed, "but that is how guilt works." She placed her hands on his chest, not his legs. "You're not still paralyzed because of the fall," she said. "You're still paralyzed because part of you is punishing yourself." The monitors began to spike, heart rate rising, neural activity flickering like sparks. "Forgive yourself," Aaliyah whispered. "Not because what happened didn't matter, but because carrying this forever won't bring him back." Mauricio sobbed openly now, the sound raw childlike. "I don't know how," he gasped. "Say it," she said, out loud. He swallowed hard. "I forgive myself. Nothing happened." Again Aaliyah urged, firmer now. "I forgive myself," he cried, voice breaking. The machine alarms chirped sharply. Again, she said, eyes locked on his. "I forgive myself," Mauricio shouted, and his leg moved. Not a twitch, not a spasm. A deliberate lift. The room erupted. Doctors shouted. One dropped a clipboard. A businessman staggered backward. Carmen covered her mouth as a sound escaped her that was half sob, half prayer. Mauricio stared at his leg like it belonged to someone else. "I moved it," he whispered. "I really moved it." Aaliyah swayed, exhaustion flooding her. "Yes," she said softly, "because for the first time, you let yourself." And in that moment everyone understood. The healing had never been just physical. It was permission. The world didn't wait. It never does. Within hours, the video escaped the walls of the Institute like a spark hitting dry grass. A shaky clip, Mauricio's leg lifting, doctors shouting a child's voice, whispering again, spread faster than anyone could stop it. By nightfall, millions had seen it. By morning, the gates were surrounded. News vans, cameras, protesters, patients in wheelchairs clutching paperwork like lifelines. Some cried, some prayed, some shouted accusations. Fake, miracle, illegal, save my child. Aaliyah watched from a second-floor window, her forehead pressed to the glass. "I never wanted this," she whispered. Carmen pulled her close. "I know, baby." Inside, the mood was no longer wonder, it was fear. Doctors argued in hushed tones about licenses and liability. Lawyers whispered words like unregulated practice and child endangerment. A man in an expensive suit arrived unannounced, his smile sharp, his voice cold. "This stops now," he said flatly. "If you continue, we'll destroy her reputation. If you stop, we'll make this disappear." Mauricio took a step forward, an actual step, unsteady but real. "No," he said. The room froze. "You laughed when she was humiliated," he continued, his voice trembling with something new conviction. "I was cruel. I was blind. And she gave me my legs back when I didn't deserve it." He turned to Aaliyah. "You don't belong to them," he said. "And you don't belong to the fear." Aaliyah looked around at the doctors torn between truth and tradition, at the businessmen who had once mocked her, now standing quietly behind her, at her mother, whose entire life had been sacrifice. "I won't hide," Aaliyah said softly. "And I won't lie." She took a breath, small shoulders rising. "If they silence me," she continued, "I'll teach anyway. If they say I can't touch, I'll show others how to listen." "You can't lock away what was never meant to belong to one person." The man scoffed. "You're 10. Aaliyah met his eyes. "And you're afraid." Silence answered her. Mauricio placed himself beside her, steady now. "We'll document everything he said. Data, doctors, cameras, truth. If they want a war against compassion, they'll have to fight it in the open." Aaliyah felt the weight lift, not disappear, but settle into purpose. Her grandmother had been right. Healing was never just about bodies. It was about refusing to let fear decide who gets to hope. And as the doors opened and the crowd surged forward, Aaliyah took her mother's hand and stepped into the noise, no longer a child being humiliated, but a voice that could no longer be ignored. The center opened quietly at first. No red carpets, no marble statues, no donor names carved into walls. Just light-filled rooms, open hands, and a promise written on the front door, dignity first. Always. Mauricio walked in on his own 2 feet the day it opened. No cameras, no applause. Just a man relearning how to exist without cruelty. He watched Aaliyah Morales teach a small group doctors, therapists, ordinary people, how to listen with their hands, how to approach pain without ego. Carmen stood nearby, no longer invisible, finally seen as the woman who raised a light strong enough to change a system. The ashamed became the healed. The mockers became protectors. The impossible became real, not because of money, not because of power, but because a child refused to accept humiliation as truth. Aaliyah never called it a miracle. She called it shared responsibility. "Healing isn't owned," she said once. "It's passed on." And that's where the real revolution lived, not in walking legs, but in softened hearts, broken systems, and people choosing compassion over control. This story isn't about a girl with a gift. It's about what happens when we stop underestimating the quiet ones, when we remember that dignity doesn't come from wealth titles or strength, but from how we treat those who have nothing to give us back. Sometimes the people the world laughs at are carrying the very answers the world needs. If this story moved something in you, if it reminded you of your worth, or someone you once underestimated, tell us in the comments. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. Because your darkest moment might be standing right next to your greatest purpose.